Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast. My name is Will Chow, and this is a very exciting podcast episode. In this episode, I'm going to be covering a book that will just blow your mind. In fact, it was so amazing that I woke up really early in the morning before I even finished this book, and I had to do this podcast to shout out from the rooftop and tell everyone I know about this because this book is just so incredible. It has so many good stories, proof of how it works with real successful people, and it just takes a new spin, a new angle on what you can do to succeed in your life that is just outstanding. I've never seen anything like this done before. So the book is called Face to Face, The Art of Human Connection. It's by Brian Grazer. And first off, do you know who Brian Grazer is? I didn't know who he is, but I found out, and he's incredible. He's kind of like one of those behind-the-scenes men who isn't well known, but is responsible for like every A-list celebrity success you can think of. Not to the extent of Jimmy Iovine, but very similar. So he's kind of like the movie and TV version of Jimmy Iovine. Jimmy Iovine's like the music mogul, record label co-founder of Interscope Records with Dr. Dre, and he did a lot of other crazy things. In fact, this book has a few stories with him and Brian Grazer, so they're good friends. But here's a quick bio about him. He's an Oscar-winning producer. His films and TV shows have been nominated for 43 Academy Awards and 195 Emmys, including 8 Mile, Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, American Gangster, Friday Night Lights, and so on. And he was named Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in the World. So, outstanding Rolodex of friendships and network. In fact, if you name a successful A-list celebrity, he probably has worked with them or knows them or has met them or has a good relationship with them. So there's that credibility there with this book. But there's more to it than that. I think the thesis of the book is what really opened my eyes. I mean, I don't know if there is a better book out there. I mean, I could think of maybe one or two, but I think this tops the list of books. And I know books, there's so many books, but this tops the list of books. And it just came out too. This book is just brand new off the press, just published. It tops the list for best books on understanding emotional intelligence, social skills, charisma, connecting with people, communication skills, networking, and body language. Body language is huge in this book. And if you've been following my blog, if you've been following my podcast, you know that emotional intelligence has been a new priority for me. And I think a lot of the related skill sets I just mentioned are also very important to me. And thankfully, thanks to books like this, training free and affordable, like this book and others, I've been able to rapidly improve my skills in a lot of these areas and my wisdom. And it's been incredible to see. And I still have a long way to go, but I no longer think that I'm below average in these skills. I think I've come a long way, and maybe I'm slightly above average. And I think body language is still one that I think a lot of people, especially Asian Americans listening to this, or the more hyper-rational, didactic type of technical engineers, or just people who didn't really get much experience or practice with social skills growing up because their parents made them focus on school or whatever else, they can really benefit from this stuff. And I was slightly that way, and I think I've definitely improved that way. And body language was one of those areas that I felt I could improve in because, and there's still a way to, it's still kind of like this to a degree. I felt like I had trouble reading people, and I think we all do. You never know for sure what someone's thinking or if they're lying, but I felt like I had room for improvement in body language. Was this person lying? Was this person telling the truth? What's this person feeling? Is he or she uncomfortable? What are his motives? Why is he doing this? What does this facial expression mean? Does that mean they're making fun of me or angry at me or just closed off, don't want to talk to me? Those were questions that I wanted answers to, that I feel like body language helps with. I think social skills are another thing that supplements that. Like, you can't determine everything from body language alone. Sometimes you have to use social skills to get more information, and this book does a fantastic job on explaining that. So I want to break down some of the tips I learned in the book, the biggest tips, and just kind of piece it apart, show some of the stories in this book, because the stories are just out of this world. I mean, let's dive in right now. In fact, I think one of the stories in the book, I mean, he does this all the time throughout the book, and some people may find it annoying because he name drops a lot, but I mean, it is what it is. I mean, so the book is just filled with, kind of like L.A. Reid's book, Sing to Me. It's just filled with like stories about like, oh, I was here, and then like this happened, and then this happened, and all of a sudden, I'm here with like, you know, all these people, and I'm, you know, making this epic film. But I think a vast majority of the stories really play a role in teaching a lesson. So he's not just name dropping. I know some people hate it because they feel like they're bragging too much. And I only found one case of the portions of the book I've read so far where he did it, and it was just like, that was a little unnecessary. Like one time he was talking, like he was illustrating a point about listening more, and he starts off with just mentioning how he was talking about he just closed a film, bought the rights for the book, the Da Vinci Code, in order to make a film about it. And I was like, okay, that's kind of unnecessary, because then he goes on to talk about how he was going to the movies to celebrate, and then he went to a concert with Prince to celebrate, and he met Prince. And I'm like, okay, why did you have to even mention the Da Vinci Code thing? But then he ties it all back together a few pages later, because, you know, it was his daughter's birthday, and to celebrate, you know, and to kind of like show off a bit to his daughter and make the moment more memorable to his daughter. He really wanted to make this a special moment for his daughter, so he used his connection skills to try and prolong the conversation with Prince from just like one sentence to like more of a conversation. And he was successful, and the whole point of the passage was the only thing he did in that moment, or the one thing he emphasized, was listening. So he mentioned how he just bought the right to the Da Vinci Code, and it was just like random, kind of something he just pulled out of his butt because he didn't know what else to say to Prince at that moment. And I think it was also because that was just what happened recently. And so he got lucky. That's how I kind of saw it, because like I've done that too, and like sometimes you just don't hit. Like you say something and it doesn't connect with them. But in this case, it did. And Prince was a huge Jehovah Witness, devout religious person, and he loves reading like these religious conspiracy books. So he it just lit a fire under Prince, and he started talking for another 10 minutes with Brian Grazer. And Brian admitted to Prince like that he had never heard anything about these books. And rather than clear him up and say, I don't know anything about these books, he was like, I don't know anything about these books. He was honest about it. Tell me more. He said, I don't know anything, tell me more. So he was interested. Rather than trying to talk and being interesting, he was interested, and he listened. And for the rest of the conversation, all he said was, that's interesting, or that's fascinating. And he let someone else talk about a topic they were passionate about, and you know, it tied together. So that was my first kind of big lesson in the book about listening that I want to kind of emphasize, and kind of illustrate like how he plays the stories and puts real world successful interactions with successful people in the real marketplace and illustrates these concepts. And that's why I love this book, because it's not just some like therapist or some life coach who has opinions telling you how you should communicate with this theory. It's like, here's what you should do, and here's like all the success I've had in my life, like straight up mainstream success, the highest level that many people would want to attain to. Not all people, but some people. And how much more proof and credibility can you get with that? Now, I want to start off with the listening chapter because I kind of want to mention that it's also common, or maybe common sense or obvious advice to some, but when you dive into it, it's not really. So with the listening stuff or the connection stuff, you might have heard to listen more, but like most people really don't. Like they're not really listening. They're just waiting for the moment to talk. Like you can almost sense it sometimes. Like you're like saying something and like they don't even respond. They're still looking at their phone, or they'll maybe grunt at you, which is still better than nothing. And then they say something that has no relation to what you say, and that just kind of sucks. Like sometimes they'll make an attempt, but you just can tell that like they really just don't know anything about your topic when you're conversing, and that's fine. Like at least they tried. But like sometimes they just it can come off as disrespectful, which just destroys connection. So common sense isn't always common practice. And then another thing is that connection as a whole is not one of the keys to success that most commonly is mentioned. And that's the whole thesis of his book, in fact, and that's one of the main things I want to get across in this podcast. I'm really kind of upset that my podcast doesn't get more reach, because I really want to spread this message far and wide and tell as many people as possible, because it is just so amazing about this book. But I mean, I don't feel like, I mean, he's so famous anyways, he doesn't need people to market this book, but I feel like he still does, because like this book deserves attention. A lot of books by billionaires just don't get the amount of press and attention that they deserve. So with Brian Grazer, I think his whole thesis to this book, and this is what's so incredible, is that he believes that the reason that he was so successful in his career and able to create so many iconic films and stuff is because he was able to establish genuine connections with almost anyone. And this book is one of a couple he wrote that kind of explains this point and explains how you can do it as well. So I found that very enlightening, because what do you usually hear with top 10 rules to success? Well, it's usually, as you can probably guess, hard work, perseverance, patience, willpower. Maybe it's turning bad stuff to good stuff, turning lemons to lemonade, stuff that you've heard 1,000 times. And those are important, those are vital, but it's refreshing to see, there's other ways, there's other strengths and skills that you can play upon, that you can use to increase your levers. And I think if you increase your levers of success with connecting, this is something that I believe anyone can learn. If I can learn it, you can learn it. And you may not become an expert like Brian Grazer, but you can get better, and that will lead to a better life. And there's some other tips in this book that I will get to that are not as common as listening, but I wanted to get that one off the bat, because I think if you read any like social skills books like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, you'll hear the thing, listening is like very common, but like people need to stop searching for new tips when they haven't even mastered their old tips. Like, start listening more. And I'm not saying that, and I don't know if Brian Grazer is saying this either. I'm not saying that if you become a master of human connection, you're going to have the massive success he has. Probably not. There's probably more pieces to the puzzle: hard work, the skills to actually film and produce and direct a movie. So there's a bunch of other stuff needed, but nonetheless, I think it's helpful. It really is. Like, in terms of your personal life, your friendships you make, your romantic relationships, he touches this in detail and explains how that's very crucial. And in fact, probably, in my opinion, that's probably going to be more beneficial to your happiness and success than making a bunch of money or being famous will anyways. So there's that involved. And of course, I don't think connection is going to solve everything. Like, If you're being mugged or attacked on the street, probably self-defense skills or assertiveness could be highly more valuable than just the ability to connect with someone at that moment. Like, they're not trying to connect with you at that moment. They're trying to steal your stuff. And maybe if you could bend it and you could use it, but like, they probably don't even want to talk to you. They're swiping a knife at you. And there's probably other situations where connection doesn't help as much. Let's say you're a victim of rape, or you're in that instance. Like, that attacker is like, I mean, you could stretch it and say it's a part of persuasion and social skills to kind of talk your way out of it, and you can use connection in that sense, but that's really not what this book is, I don't think, really targeting. And there's other instances where maybe you're an engineer at Tesla, and what is needed is engineer problem solving skills to get this done. And if you have none of that, no engineer skills and just connection skills, can you get a job there? Probably not as an engineer, maybe as a salesperson or something else. So I think it can be useful, but not always directly one-on-one, if that makes sense. And that's just my opinion. If you feel like, oh no, I think I want you to read the full book before you voice your opinion. But I think basically, just my skeptic nature is coming out. You don't have to read the full book if you don't want to, but if you have if you think that connection can be used in those instances I mentioned it couldn't, write me back, and I'd love your input, especially if you've read part of the book and you think otherwise. I'd love a friendly, respectful debate, as long as it's polite and respectful. Yeah, feel free to tweet me or reach out via my contact form or my email newsletter. Just reply to any email on willyoulaugh.com. But anyways, okay, back to the book. So listening is one of those that a lot of people struggle with. Me, I actually think this is the one thing that I do really well. I think a lot of introverts and shy people tend to do better than average on this. I think I'm exceptionally good at listening, and I think it's to the point where it's a bit of a detriment. I think I lean on it too much. I found many conversations where I just don't say a thing because I just have so much comfort, or I have a hard time adding or contributing in a way that adds to the conversation, especially when they talk about sports or football, where I just have no background in, that it's hard for me to contribute. And so my problem, I can listen and just ask questions and connect with someone and not talk at all or very, very little for 20-30 minutes. I've done it many times before, usually when someone is very comfortable with me and is willing to talk and open up. So it doesn't always happen, but for the most part it does. I think what I have to work on more is actually contributing equally to a conversation. Otherwise, I just get phased out, especially in group conversations. Like when they kind of start sensing, or maybe they don't even sense it, they just start talking, and I'm not a part of a conversation for more than 10 minutes. Their body language almost shifts, and they kind of walk away from me, or just assume I'm not part of the conversation, even though I'm trying to nod and join. So I'm to the point where I listen too much. So that's a good segue to some of the other tips in the book that will kind of help me with that, and also give you more details about a human conversation. So I'm going to give a few more points and wrap it up here. So then another point in the book is about connection and opening up and contributing. So he gives another crazy name-droppy-ish story, which I kind of liked a lot. I didn't mind the name-dropping at all. So he's going to dinner with one of his great friends, Jimmy Iovine, or it was lunch, and they didn't see each other for a while. They're catching up. They're both doing great. And then they decide to invite Mark Wahlberg around because they both work with Mark for a while now. He's a famous actor, but before that, he started his career as a recording artist under Interscope Records. Fun fact. And so they go to this pretty elegant LA restaurant, and they're there, and then they get a text from this other person who wants to join. And this guy is also very successful. He is a unprecedented success in Broadway music and film, and so it's a really cool guy there. And it was like, wow, that's really interesting. And so he joins as well. They're basically texting, and he's like, "You want to get dinner?" And he's like, "We're at lunch now with Jimmy Iovine and Mark Wahlberg. You want to come along?" So he's like, "Okay, I'll come along. I'll be there in a few minutes." So he shows up there, and then all along the way he texts and says just 3 words, or 2 words, "Bono's coming." So then Bono, as you all know, like one of the most famous musicians in the world, behind the band U2, he shows up there too, and now there's this 5 very elite, incredible people all together in this tiny booth in this restaurant. So that sets the scene, and then he starts giving like tips while explaining the rest of the story. So he explains a little bit about his standard conversation style and his standard method for connecting and contributing in any sort of networking or catching up in high value or conversations with high value people, basically. And one of the things he mentioned was he usually gives equally with his taking. So in his conversations, what that means is like if he takes in the sense of like asking questions about someone, he usually matches that with a story or something to kind of contribute value back. And I found that very interesting. So that's his like standard style, and that's something I could do more of myself. So when you ask a question to listen, then you contribute with a story and so forth. So that's something I think it works really well for me as a listener. I'm actually glad I started off by kind of starting with the listening tip, because most people are the opposite. I think they kind of just talk. They talk about what they want. Their mind is filled with what they want, what they're interested in, what they care about. And then the other person's like, man, this guy or girl is just full of himself. They're talking about stuff I don't care about. Screw him. So I think, nonetheless, it's a good point of interaction there. He goes on further to kind of just like break out how he can listen and show interest and show basically fascination. And so basically in that story with Bono, he decided to try something new than what he usually did with his standard approach, which probably has worked really well for him, which is to just listen for the whole period, say nothing in this this booth of 5 successful people. And with that space, he wanted to just let Bono talk, and he said like the approach there was to come at it with a angle of fascination, interest, openness. And by doing that and really absorbing what he says and not just waiting for your turn to talk, he learned a lot in person that he never knew about Bono and his work in charitable contributions. Bono talked a lot about specifics in helping people with AIDS and how he was funding that and all this stuff. And Brian was able to learn a lot about that in detail, and that enriched his own life through that fascination and discovery process. And this is something I do as well, but seeing these tips that I've done before affirmed from someone with all this experience and real world application just kind of builds my confidence on these. Because you hear, as I mentioned, you hear these from other books with less credibility, and there's always a little bit of skepticism here. But now with this book, I'm able to piece apart the golden principles that are legit, and then say like, and nail them down as like, these are legit, I'm going to keep doing them. So there's that. And then I want to jump to another story in the book by Eminem. So basically, this is at a time when Brian was like in the 90s. So he wasn't that big yet, and neither was Eminem. And so essentially, neither was hip-hop either. So hip-hop was this like niche subculture, and people from the outside, this like news reporter he was talking with, was saying like how hip-hop was going to die. It was just like a trend, and it was like for this like subculture of young people. And Brian disagreed. He was like, this news reporter is on the outside looking in. He thinks he's an insider, but he has no idea what's going on. In truth, I always believe that what young people think is hot is what will become mainstream in a few years. So he really believed in hip-hop. He found it as like the soul of young people at the time, and he wanted to give it a face and a name, and he wanted to do that by creating a film about hip-hop, which was to be 8 Mile, which like won a bunch of Oscars and stuff like that, and featured Eminem in it. So long story short, he meets with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. They introduce him to Eminem, who had a record hit album, but still was on the come up. He wasn't a superstar yet. So they have their first meeting, and you could tell this Brian, first off, is just, he has such a natural, authentic, honest way of his philosophy to human connection. I mean, I encourage you to read the book yourself, because you just get that sense. It's not there's no sense of like keeping score there. There's no sense of manipulation in a negative sense, like I'm gonna do this so this person gets something from me, so I can get something from them. I just get the sense of authenticity, warmth, openness, connection from his philosophy, and that's what seems to work really well for him. So anyhow, he's applying these principles that he talks about more in this book, and he tries everything under the sun to open up and get Eminem to open up. But from the get-go, Eminem is a stone wall. So they have like a 30-minute meeting, and like from the moment Eminem sits down, Marshall Mathers, he doesn't hold any eye contact. He doesn't talk back to this person. Well, he talks back, but like he's just very cold, doesn't hold eye contact, doesn't say much. And Brian's trying everything. He's trying to be nice, he's trying to be warm, he's trying all these different stories and showing all these different things about him to connect with Eminem, to make him feel comfortable, to get him to open up. He's asking questions about Eminem. He's trying to be friendly. He's trying to make eye contact and smile, and it's not working. And he talks about this issue, and he uses this story to illustrate just one example of it and how to deal with it. And I just love his holistic, honest kind of approach to doing this. And so like the story ends with basically Eminem saying, "I'm out," standing up from his seat and starting to walk out of the room. And Brian, at a last-ditch attempt, goes up to Em and says, "Just wait 1 second. Like, just give me one more chance. Do you animate?" So I thought that was kind of weird. So he asked Eminem, "Do you animate?" And Eminem, he looked back and he was like, "Well, I did this, and this, and back when I was a kid, I did this." And then he sat back down, and they talked for another hour, and Eminem told him his whole story about his life, and that was the framework for 8 Mile. So with that last-ditch attempt to connect, it ended up working. So with that in mind, I think he had a bunch of points, and I want to kind of just list them out to you so that you can learn something from it. So one of his big points was that if you never risk and make a strong attempt to connect, then you're not going to connect with them. It's better to take the risk and have a full force attempt to connect with someone. Because otherwise, if you don't try, or you feel like, well, this person is just standoffish, I'm not going to try, or this person doesn't like me, so I'm not going to try, then your chances of success are zero. So with Brian, he did this. He tried, and then at the last attempt, he asked, do you animate? And animate in Latin is animata, and the root of that, as Brian Grazer explains in his book, is soul, love, and those words, for whatever reason, hit a chord with Eminem, and struck just the right chord for Eminem to open up. And I didn't really understand what he meant. Did he mean animation? Like, did Eminem do animated work? I don't think that's what he meant. I think maybe Brian was asking if Eminem could use his body language in acting, or used his soul while rapping. I don't know, but the point is, Brian tried something, another angle, and it worked. I think another big point that he wanted to get across was his whole, healthy, honest, socially intelligent approach to all this had to do a lot with kind of understanding and empathizing with another person and the perspective they're coming from. So in this example, he understood, and this just comes from experience, I guess, but he understood, and he mentions it in the book, that Eminem didn't have anything against him. Eminem wasn't angry about him or didn't like Brian. He was just a shy introvert. And the way it was worded in the book, I wasn't sure if he figured this out looking back. Maybe so, but that's a good portion of social intelligence there. And it's fascinating to me because I had very similar questions and answers on a much smaller scale in the last year. I've had many instances in the last couple years, in fact, where I went to, like, one time I went to Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich personal finance / career development meetup group for fans. So Ramit wasn't there, but a lot of his readers were. So this was a few years ago, but like 20 or 30 people showed up. And back then I was worse off with connection. And this one person was just kind of like standoffish and quiet. And I made an effort to kind of bring him into a conversation. And then all of a sudden he was kind of like very into it. But then like there's points where he would just like get very passionate about what he was saying. And it would kind of rub me the wrong way because he was just like being a bit disrespectful about it. He was like, no. He was basically like saying like how there's different definitions of introvert, and shy and introvert doesn't mean the same thing. I was just like, chill. In my mind, I was like, just like, chill, man. I didn't say that out loud to be polite. And looking back, I was like, this guy was just shy, and he was just kind of focused and passionate about what he was doing, and he wasn't really self-aware enough to like know that he was coming off rude. He didn't have bad intentions, so kind of knowing that kind of helps. Another time, I was met this new person, and it was career related, and I was kind of like telling him about stuff, and I was getting to know him. He was getting to know me, and from the get, he was just very shy and quiet and reserved. And whenever I asked him, like, do you have any more questions for me or anything, he was just like, nope. And I was like, trying to get to know him and give him tips about career, but also personal. And he was just like very curt and short and said a few things, and that was it. He kind of maintained eye contact, but he was very quiet. He said what he wanted to say. Didn't project too much warmth or anything. It was just kind of neutral. And I actually ended up consulting one of my mentors about it, and she was just like, I think he's just shy. And she was right. Looking back, he's opened up a lot I've gotten to know him over the last year, and since then he's just opened up a lot. He's just gotten more acquainted with me and others, and just talked a lot more. And I've noticed that's a case with a lot of shy people. Like when I meet them at first, I remember one time as a freshman in college, there's this one person, we were playing game Super Smash Brothers, and there's like 10 people in the room, and this one person there, it was the start of the year, he seemed like a good, friendly guy to others, and then to me, like, I would talk to him and he would just like say something and then look away, and like I just got the sense that he was cold and he didn't like me, and he was rude, and like every time I tried to open up and talk to him and converse with him, he'd just give me like one-word answers and then resume and, talk to other people or just stare at the Super Smash Brothers TV screen. And then come the next semester, I just had more opportunities to talk to him. He waved at me. We had the same class together, English class for Greek mythology or something like that. And he was friendly there, and I opened up to him, and he talked to me more, and he opened up to me, and we talked more, and he was super friendly. We even exchanged some tips on like studying. And each time, sometimes we bump into each other during class or leaving class, or in the hallway, or we would just have time to play games together. And I never ended up... he was actually a very friendly guy. One of my friendliest guys I met that year. Very respectful. And I feel kind of bad not ever like staying connected with him. I don't think he had a Facebook, which was the problem. But he was really friendly. It turns out he was just shy initially. And so I think Brian Grazer does a great job of just kind of explaining that in the book and kind of like piecing it together. And sometimes they are like, they don't like you. And he addresses that too. He's like, sometimes they really don't like you, or they find you creepy. And that segues into my next lesson from the book, which is like, you have to be socially intelligent enough to be able to piece it apart. So he says like, more so towards one of the first few chapters of the book, he mentions like this one page is just like this perfect page for like a playbook for like kind of like gauging feedback and assessing it. So he's like, okay, like let's say you're warm and friendly and all this stuff, and you connect and you maintain eye contact, which he emphasizes a lot, and they're just not feeling it. Well, assess yourself. Maybe you were too close to that person and you came off creepy to them, or maybe you were too antagonistic, or you touched that person or went into their personal space too soon, too early, or maybe you held eye contact for too long. And he cites a research study about how the optimal time to hold eye contact with someone new is around 7 seconds. And he says maybe you held eye contact for longer than that and you came off creepy. And then he says like, okay, if that wasn't the case, if creepiness wasn't a factor, then the other main thing that usually is the case is XYZ. And then he goes into that and explains that. So it's like if you didn't come across creepy, then maybe you did this, and then in that case you want to do this. So read the book if you want the details, but I think that's very important to me. So those are things that I kind of knew about and kind of pieced together on my own, but just having like this solid grasp of it, I can kind of focus on this and be like, okay, now I know, what Brian Grazer is talking about. I can like focus on this, like, okay, it's probably more so my eye contact and personal space than my bad breath, because that might be a factor too, but like I'm going to trust this man because he knows what the heck he's talking about. And that's just fantastic. So I want to touch real quickly on just the overall writing style of the book and the length of the book before I jump into another tip, because I think that's important. The book is just fantastic, first off, because there's just so many people in this book, and testimonials of this book. I mean, I'm looking at the back cover of the book now, and Bob Iger, CEO of the Disney company, Walt Disney Company, Malcolm Gladwell praised the book. Eddie Murphy, Whitney Wolf Herd, Brian Chesky. So those last two were the CEO of Bumble and Airbnb, and Walter Isaacson, the biographer behind Steve Jobs and Leonardo da Vinci. They all praised this book. I mean, this guy is a world-class act. In terms of the writing style, I think it's very digestible, it's very understandable, it's conversational, it's concise. I like it a lot. Is it the best writing I've ever seen? No, but it doesn't have to be. It's polished. As a writer myself, I have spotted a couple minor errors, nothing crazy, but just minor things that I think intermediate to advanced writer would know, but would not register to most people. So stuff like using quite, you don't want to use that word because it's just redundant and doesn't add much to the writing. He uses that a few times. He uses adverbs a bit much, but I'm being kind of nitpicky here, so forget about that. I also think the book is concise in terms of pages and actual messages in the book. So he doesn't stretch out a chapter for too long, and the book in total is like 200 pages. Like, come on, that's so digestible. Anyone should pick up this book and just read it, seriously. So back to another tip, eye contact. So he emphasizes eye contact a lot in this book, and jumping back to the thesis, he really emphasizes that you should really work on connection, and eye contact is like one of the key parts of connection, because it really just like lit up his career. Like, he used it to really connect, as you saw with Eminem, and close these deals with people. So with eye contact, he's like maintaining eye contact is really important, but also using eye contact to gauge other people is like probably like the number one thing I think he emphasizes in this book, or one of the number one things. So what he means by that is, like, you can just tell so much by eye contact with someone. You can tell if they're comfortable, uncomfortable. You can tell if they're at ease, or they're worried, or they're warm, or they're fearful. And the more you know about a person, like, the more you can convey, like, and have a whole conversation with eye contact. So he goes into a whole story with his wife, how he met his wife, and then like how, now that they've been married for years and years, they can be sitting on opposite sides of the room, and with just like a flick of the eyes, they can tell whether the other person is making an inside joke, or they're bored, or they're amused. And so eye contact is really important. Now, I don't think that eye contact will tell you everything. Like, that's the thing, like lie detector tests and all that stuff. I don't think you can 100% confirm it, whether this person is lying or telling the truth. I don't believe that exists, but it definitely helps. Like, let's say someone stole something valuable from your house or your room. Could you use eye contact or body language to just determine for sure that they did it without evidence? Probably not. Nonetheless, I think in terms of human connection, it's very useful, and it's not always about information gathering either. I know I mentioned that was like a key reason why I wanted to get into it, but I think with this book, he's really emphasizing it more for just connecting with people, forming genuine relationships with people, getting them to trust you, to like you, because he emphasizes that if they like you and trust you, then they will open up to you and reveal the world to you and do business with you, or just again, I don't think he meant it as, the only goal out of this is to just make money. Like, it's also the kind of like form good bonds and relationships and so forth as well with his wife and other people. And so his story with his wife, I'll keep it short, is basically like from the get-go, like his eye contact with his wife was very important to him, and it's really kind of helped him be attracted to his wife. I was a little disappointed it didn't really go into much in terms of the dating aspect, but he basically just said like it helped attract him to his wife, and now years later, like he can look across the room, and if his wife is like bored with this guy talking, he can tell, and he'll laugh about it, and they'll like make eye contact in different ways to kind of like communicate to each other. He does say that like it really does help with just being able to understand where someone else is coming from, and figuring out like where they're at right now, what stage they're at, how comfortable they're feeling, like, so that you can make them feel more warm or less warm, or get across what you want. So moving on from that, he has a bunch of different people in this book: Denzel Washington, Obama, Richie Roberts, a ton of people. And I want to jump to Oprah Winfrey. So he has a chapter that has a great story about Oprah Winfrey, and each chapter has a quote in it, and a lot of these quotes are very modern, and you could just tell he's very plugged into the world. Like because he quotes a lot of these like personal development leaders, or just scientific leaders, or even just famous people or successful people. One of his quotes is from Brene Brown. But anyhow, so with the Oprah quote, or the Oprah story, this is in the chapter Face to Face. He talks about how Oprah is like one of the most skilled communicators in the world, if not the most skilled, and he justifies this by saying that she is able to let get anyone to open up and reveal things about them that they haven't revealed to anyone else. And Brian has done that to Oprah as well, in the sense that Brian has revealed a lot of stuff to Oprah. Not that Brian has been able to get Oprah to open up, but Brian has realized this when he met Oprah. So he kind of breaks it apart as to how Oprah is so good at connecting with people and communicating. And he says that he believes it's down to how empathetic her eyes are, her general sense of warmth, to even the most closed-off interviewees, and then combining that with her just general sense of empathy and understanding with a person. So it's not just her eyes, but like her general, what she says, and her general gist really conveys the fact that she cares about this person, because she probably genuinely does, and that really just helps form that connection there. Another thing with Oprah is she really disarms people with her warmth. So like the first time Brian was interviewed by Oprah, it was a moment where I think the key thing he took away from it was that almost instantly, despite like all the personal problems he was having at that moment, Oprah just made him trust her. Like, there's just something about Oprah where he was like, I trust this woman, and he opened up and started pouring his heart out to her. And I think that's one of the theses to the book, which is that like, if you can get people to trust you by liking you and feeling warm to you and all this other stuff, then the world opens up. So he illustrates this with Oprah's story. So years later, he is promoting a book, and he gets interviewed by Oprah again for her show Super Soul Sunday. And this time he's feeling more on guard because it's a big press tour and all this other stuff. And he's feeling very vulnerable and uneasy. The moment he goes into the driveway and gets to the house where they're being interviewed, and he sees Oprah, all his nerves melt away. And I like how he at least attempts to crystallize it a little bit and explain why. He doesn't mention much, but he says The feeling didn't come from any words she said. It came from the way her face lit up as our eyes met in greeting. I felt understood. So I think what I took away with that is, make sure your face lights up and, show that warmth when you're meeting new people or old people that you've known before. But I don't think that's the complete equation. It's also about making sure you understand the other person. People don't care what you have to say until they know how much you care. And that's something that we can all do a better job at. And even in let's use the mugging example. Again, it doesn't apply to everything. It won't solve all your problems, but maybe even in the mugging example, it's a bit of a stretch, but I said that doesn't apply to this book. But maybe if you have the chance, you can try and understand, why is this guy trying to take a knife and stab me to take my money? And if you get a chance, you can ask the smuggler, why do you need this money so bad? How can I help? Well, maybe this guy doesn't have food, or he needs to pay for medical bills, and he has to use force. And he, out of desperation, that's what he does. So you can even use that understanding in those situations. I tried to do this recently with a homeless man who was just super persistent. And he gave a lot of stuff about his life, so I was trying to understand his life before I gave him money, because he was asking for a lot. And he told me how he didn't have a place to stay, and how he wanted to just sleep inside rather than outdoors, and that mattered more to him than food on the table. And he told me a bit about how his life and how he struggled, and how his brother died from a murder that's still unsolved, and how he had a wife and children, but they were separated, and he used to play football. And I tried to understand him, but also it was kind of more so to make sure he was not lying about his suffering. But I also really wanted to understand him, and I could still get better at it, but that's just an illustration of, in my own life, about how I was applying this before I even read this book. So now I can try and apply it even more. So in some cases, the wrong thing to do is still the wrong thing. That guy who's still a mugger is still going to attack you. But still, I think it's something worth mentioning. So on to the story by Oprah. So basically, Brian Grazer saw Oprah's 2013 convention speech at Harvard, not in person, probably online or something, but the point is, she has a point in the speech that really struck Brian, and it was worth including in this book. She basically says she had done over 35,000 interviews over her career, and every time the camera shuts off, everyone always turns to her and says the same thing, which is, was that okay? She's heard that from President Bush. Actually, I'm just going to read it verbatim from the speech. I heard it from President Bush. I heard it from President Obama. I've heard it from heroes and from housewives. I've heard it from victims and perpetrators of crimes. I even heard it from Beyonce in all her Beyonce-ness. They all want to know one thing. Was that okay? So I think the point of the message, and Brian goes on to explain this, is that we all have insecurities and doubts. No matter how awesome or confident or successful someone appears, we all want to kind of make sure everything's going to be okay, because I think as humans we seek comfort and security out of survival. So basically, he uses this point to kind of bring out how we can connect with people better. First off, use your eyes to gauge whether you can trust someone. That's something that people do instinctively. But when we find openness and attentiveness there, we are more likely to let ourselves be vulnerable and share. So are you open? Are you attentive? When we feel listened to, we feel understood and validated. So are you listening to people? If you are, they will feel understood and validated. And when they do feel understood and validated, they'll like you more. And if they like you more, they're going to trust you more. And guess what? We do business with people we trust. But he doesn't talk about business. He says when we trust them, we're more inclined to bear our essential and authentic selves. So it's not just about making more money. It's about, just having a real authentic connection with someone. Like, when's the last time you just been able to like count on someone and just talk to them and be your authentic true self, and they be their essential true self, and you just open up to them and form a strong friendship? That's special, and that's something that's maybe more valuable than money in our lifetimes when we die and we look back at our lives. So forming those meaningful bonds transcends small talk and cookie cutter conversation. And he says we have to get to this place. So he goes on to like break out why Oprah is able to get people to open up, and it's because they sense that sincere interest and concern, and she's unreservedly herself. She strives to approach people with honesty and authenticity. So I think you get the point here. I can keep going, but you get the point with the Oprah story. And I want to move on to something he mentions about kind of being real and being authentic, and how virtual reality and smartphones and cell phones and stuff like that, and I guess dating apps kind of don't always get you there. So he is a firm believer in face-to-face interactions and taking risks. So he doesn't think that emails or texts or any of that can come close to a real person-to-person interaction. Because with a real interaction, you can gauge body language, you can gauge tone, eye contact, facial movements, all that stuff, to really get a true sense for that person. And if you want a real authentic connection, he asserts that you have to get off and see that person in the real world at some point. You can use dating apps and all that stuff to help facilitate and meet the right people, but you have to meet them in real life at some point, and that's really where the magic happens. So you have to emphasize that you can't just rely on virtual things, because that's not going to fulfill you. He also talks about taking the risk, making the risk to be awkward. He says a lot of people feel awkward or feel uncomfortable with maintaining or making eye contact with someone, or starting a conversation with someone who's, on their phone, or, just looking away, or not even trying. And he says a big reason that this is happening more is because everyone has a phone now and they can look down on it, and there's that risk that this person doesn't want to be disturbed. They don't want to be bothered. That risk that they just want to surf their phone, or they have their headphones in because they don't want you to connect with them. And he says if you have to take that risk to form that connection, and there are more barriers now to give plausible chance that maybe this person doesn't want to talk to you. But there's always been that risk, even back before phones. When Brian would get on the elevator, before there were cell phones, he would feel compelled to talk to people. But now there are cell phones, he can kind of sense that, like, maybe I shouldn't talk to these people, because they have all these reasons that they might not talk to me, especially since they're glancing at their phone all the time. But he says you still gotta plunge out there and talk to people and try and at least attempt a connection, because that's really where the work gets done. I think this is definitely true, but I personally think that there is a line in the sand that needs to be drawn, mainly and mostly when it comes to dating. Now he's referring to connection holistically in all forms: friendships, family, business relationships, romantic relationships, But I feel like there's a line definitely to be drawn with romantic relationships, especially when I reference Tucker Max and his podcast and his book and his philosophy where he is most successful, which is in romantic relationships and connecting with people and personal and social skills. And I think there is a point, and what Tucker says is like, if a girl does not like you, stop harassing her. And there's definitely that as well. So I think with some guys, they can definitely misinterpret this advice or take it too far and like harass a girl until, it blows up in their face and they get a criminal case, or maybe even not that far. They just ruin their reputation or just leave a bad taste and a bad impression on the world because they're just harassing these women who get hit on all the time, and the last thing they want is another guy to hit on them. I've unfortunately stumbled onto that, and the women were kind of rude. Like, they were like, clearly they had nothing they wanted to do to me. But not all women are like this. Some are very open to connection. So I just want to put that caveat there. I think if you want to apply this, like, use it more for like other people. Like, maybe it's, let's say you're a straight male, maybe it's other men in the elevator at work. I mean, that's a good time to connect with them and like get to know them as people and form that relationship, and that can help you out later in life, and it can help you right now. You get a genuine relationship with someone you didn't, and they can open up with you and get to know you. And if you don't try because they're all on their phones, and you think they don't want to be bothered, when in reality they're just surfing the web bored, you've lost that chance. And if you don't try, the chance is zero, unless they talk to you first. But at least for me, that usually doesn't happen. It sometimes happens, but not as often, because I've just realized after a lot of experience that especially in big networking events, I tend to be invisible. I kind of fade into the crowd because I guess I'm just average looking or whatever. So you gotta seize the opportunity if it doesn't present itself. Lastly, I want to kind of jump to the intro of the book. So it's kind of paradoxical since this podcast is wrapping up, but the intro of the book goes into a story about how when he was a kid, he had a lot of problems in school because he had dyslexia, which wasn't even diagnosed as a medical term yet. So he had a reading disability, but everyone at the time just assumed he was lazy because he couldn't read. And since he was so bad, he was very insecure in school, and he avoided eye contact and did everything he could to avoid connecting with teachers, because that way he would avoid being embarrassed, which he still oftentimes was, in front of the entire class when he didn't know the answer to something. I mean, I felt that embarrassment too a few times when I remember one time, and this is such a embarrassing story in a sense, but I was in English class, and I just sat in the back of the room because that's where I was assigned in my seat. And I would just dread, kind of like Brian did when the teacher did. I was a good student, but I would just dread being called on to read something, because this English teacher would always throw something up on the projector and have one person read a few paragraphs and then have another read a few paragraphs. And that was how all of our students got through a book during class. I would dread her calling on me because my eyesight was terrible, and that was another insecurity because my parents hated the fact that I had to wear glasses because it didn't make me look good, and hated buying new glasses because my prescription would just get worse every year. But at the same time, I was embarrassed about it, and I was embarrassed that I couldn't read the projector because it was too far away and so fuzzy for me. Even though I got new glasses every year, the prescription would just drop so much because I was playing video games a lot, and maybe that affected my eyesight, but I couldn't read it. And for whatever reason, my teacher just didn't have enough social tact to say, like, hey, let me just stop you right there and move you closer to the front of the room so you can read this. She would just kind of let me go at it. Maybe she thought I had a reading disability when it was really just like an eyeglass thing. But she would call on me to read, and I would hate it because I would struggle to read one word after the other. Not because I couldn't read. I could read really well, but I couldn't see the words. They're too far away from me. I needed thicker glasses. And I was grateful because, like, one time, there's this blonde, athletic classmate that sat across from me at my table. And I was very thankful for him because, usually, like, I guess I got bullied or picked on or just kind of left to my own devices, being the Asian skinny nerd. But this kid was always so friendly and respectful to me, and I don't even remember his name or stay in contact with him, but I remember the feeling and his face, or not even his face, but his general presence, like this white, athletic, blonde kid. And I remember, like, he was helpful. Like, there were points where it got excruciatingly painful and embarrassing for me to read, like, a few paragraphs, and he would chime in and just kind of, like, whisper the words to me so I could read them. Anyhow, I bring that up because Brian had many similar stories where he would just screwed over because he couldn't read well. And the point of it was that one day, thanks to his grandma, who, unlike his parents and his teachers, praised him for his strengths, which was his ability to connect with people and talk to people rather than read and write. And his grandma would say, like, you have amazing gift of gab. You're going places. Keep connecting with people. Keep asking those questions. You're going far. Because of that encouragement, which I think is a common pattern of successful people, there's always someone, a grandma, a dad, a mom, a grandfather, a teacher who encouraged people, like with Jay-Z or Will Smith, and told them, you're smart, you can do this, you have this strength. With Gary Vaynerchuk, they doubled down on that and they believed in themselves and they did something. So Brian, he did that, and instead of withdrawing away, he connected with his teachers socially through communication. And guess what happened? The world opened up to him. Despite his reading disability, he doubled down on his strengths instead, and the world opened up to him in school, and he was able to kind of, make up for his deficiencies in one area in school with his communication skills in another. And that's the whole thesis of the book. Check out the book. It's called Face to Face: The Art of Human Connection by Brian Grazer. And if you do choose to buy this book, you can also get the Audible version. And if you go to the web article version of this podcast episode on my website, there will be links. I have one affiliate link where if you click through and you've never tried Audible before, you get one free audiobook of your choice when you sign up. So Audible, if you're not familiar, it's like $15 a month, and you get to download like a free, like one or two free audiobooks out of Amazon's collection. So it's a cool membership service that I recommend. Definitely something worth doing. And there's also a link to just the straight up book there on Amazon. If you want to go through my link, I'll get a commission at no extra cost to you if you do purchase through it. But you don't have to. I would love it if you did, but you don't have to. Or if you really go through any link on my website to Amazon, then I will, and then you search up the book, I'll still get that commission. But once again, the book is Face to Face: The Art of Human Connection by Brian Grazer. I also recommend any of his other books. I think he's written at least one other book that touches on the same topic from different angles, and how it's kind of transformed his life and can transform yours. So check it out. Exceptional stuff. It's still pretty early in the morning. The birds are singing and chirping, and you may have heard a couple. And I just want to kind of leave you all with a positive message of the day, which is that we all struggle through stuff. Like, I struggle through stuff. Some of the people I respect a lot, like one of my local gym coaches, our gym managers, he's someone I just respect because he's always very happy and caring, and he shows a lot of warmth. You can tell he wants the best for me. He has revealed to me that he also struggles with unhappiness or just frustration at times too. He's not always happy, even though I perceived him to be. And we all struggle through stuff, but we must persevere. We must put our best foot forward. We must do what's in our best interest to care for ourselves, whether it's to go to therapy or let our past trauma leave us behind and move forward. We must take our time to connect with people and understand them, and we'll live a better life because of it. So whatever your struggles are, whether they're tiny in the sense of like maybe you live a decent life, but you could live a better life with $500 more a month in your pocket, or if your struggles were big, maybe you had horrible parents or abusive situations, that is something that we can all work on and get through, whether with a therapist or just on our own, and preferably not on our own, like, reach out to friends or something. But basically, I'm just saying, like, we all struggle. Do whatever you can to the best of your ability to care for yourself and care for others, and you'll live a happier, better life. Thanks for listening. I think this is going to be one of the most epic podcast episodes I've ever recorded. Really check out this book. Really check it out. I think it's going to be very valuable to you. Check out the other articles on my website, because I have a lot of other book recommendations that you've never heard of that are probably better than the cliche crap that gets all the attention. At willyoulaugh.com. Hit that subscribe button. Let me know if you have any requests for podcast topics. But so thankful that you listened to all this. See you later.